In a roadhouse in Wisconsin this month, I met a man who I call the Mexican Tony Robbins. He arrived in this country as a young man with almost nothing but the entrepreneurial spirit, a great deal of self-discipline to which his ham-like biceps attested, and an amazing value of personal responsibility, which supported him on his path to prosperity. Because of his reputation and success, he told us about being asked by a collective of his customers what he thought about the election. His response, he said, "We live in a country of over 300 million people. No one man can make America great. The question is," he asked each of them, "are you great? Are you great? Are you great?" It's a wonderful question for us to challenge ourselves with today, as American greatness is not a Democratic or a Republican issue. I don't know if tonight's speaker, I don't know if his humility would get in the way of declaring himself great, but what I can attest to is that he's become one of the greatest champions of free speech in our history. His effort is great, his talent is great, his dedication is great, and certainly his attitude is great. Since we last hosted Michael in 2023, he's been writing, speaking, testifying, and traveling the world at the tip of the spear in our fierce fight for freedom of speech. He was previously recognized, yes. He was the best-selling author of San Francisco, Why Progressives Ruin Cities and Apocalypse Never, Why the Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All, both of which he's going to be signing tonight, and a leading investigative journalist and former gubernatorial candidate who, in his decades of work, wrote major stories on crime, drug policy, and homelessness. He is a Time Magazine Hero of the Environment and co-founder of the California Peace Coalition, an alliance of parents of children killed by fentanyl, parents of homeless addicts and recovering addicts, and our room has a special place in our heart for those folks, Michael. He's now C.B.R. Chair of Politics, Censorship, and Free Speech at the new University of Austin, but the continued commitment to his values have indeed taken him on an incredible journey. Recently, Michael was heard publicly telling the European Commission, in particular the President of the EU Executive Branch, to back off. It was really hard to be mad at Michael last month when he told me he had to reschedule his appearance as he was to testify at a congressional hearing. He didn't tell me it was about UFOs. But let's face it, 2024 can't get any weirder. And Glenn Beck actually said that his presence added a lot of credibility to the hearing. So please help me welcome back to the forum a man who keeps the Censorship Industrial Complex up at night, Michael Shellenberger.
Well, I think like a lot of you, the day after the election, it was so much easier to breathe, wasn't it? I couldn't even figure out what was going on with me physiologically. I was like, why is it so easy to breathe, you know? Is it because I'm in Manhattan? I was in Manhattan at the time. And, you know, we ended up thinking, what is catharsis? You know, it's this incredible feeling of relief. And I was neutral. I didn't vote for president. I have an old-fashioned view of journalism. I want to cover this administration seriously. I'm going to hold them to account. And if you make your commitment publicly to somebody like that, we know that the psychology of it is that it biases you. So I did vote for Prop 36, though, which did pass very proudly. I'm very much obviously on the record as supporting Prop 36, but I was a neutral, and yet I felt enormous relief. And I was also, you know, it's funny because obviously I wasn't the only one, and I wasn't even the only person, I wasn't the only lefugee. You know, there were other refugees, people that had left the left and who were sort of politically homeless. And, you know, one of them was Justine Bateman, who was one of the characters on Family Ties, for those of you that were old enough to remember the 80s. You know, there was All in the Family in the 70s, and it was the liberal son and the conservative, or the liberal son and the conservative dad. In the 80s was Family Ties, and it was the conservative son, the liberal parents. And she just tweeted, decompressing after 4 years of walking on eggshells. And that's how I felt. I mean, I think that to be conservative or libertarian or Republican, you see it but you're also probably you have a little bit more protection than those of us that came from the left and were ostracized and punished for asking hard questions. And it got us thinking, and she, by the way, if you haven't read hers, just you can find Justine Bateman on there, is very eloquent. Like it's one of the things that you see in these moments, these historical moments where things are changing so quickly. I mean, how much has happened since I've seen you all in the last year? But she was very eloquent in describing what I think you can only call a kind of totalitarian atmosphere in Hollywood. You know, like this place that was supposed to be liberal, it's supposed to be open, and yet it's just become, and you can see it, like the lower quality, the degradation. There's no good movies. There's very few good movies. There's very little good television. And it's because everybody, as she described in there, is just being so careful to just hew to the party line. You know, you've got to have this number of people of color, you know, BIPOC characters. They've got to, you know, it's all got to be in a kind of math in how you do this. It's the most dehumanizing approach, and you know, and I think that was the experience for a lot of us, and it got me thinking. You know, got us. My colleague and I have a new colleague who's very special, is my co-author often, Alex Gutentag, and she and I have been thinking a lot about what was that, like what just happened exactly, and not just like now, but like really like last 12 years. If you were to kind of put a date on it, somewhere around 2013, that's the first year of the Black Lives Matter lie. By which I mean the big lie that there was an increase in police killing unarmed black men or unarmed anybody, that there was evidence that police officers were killing black people at higher rates than white people. All of that turned out not to be true. There is no epidemic of police killing unarmed black people in the United States. There hasn't been ever, if you know, unless you go back maybe to, you know, after the Civil War. But this was all nonsense. It starts in 2013. And then you think, well, you know, you make up these periods in time. You know, we're just arbitrarily choosing these dates. But if you had to pick a date, you might choose somewhere between the election of November 2024 and the inauguration. So you get a kind of 12-year period. And we were like, what do we call that? Like, what is that? And my colleague, Alex, was the one who said, you know, it's the woke reign of terror. And where is that from? It's from the French reign of terror. She's a better historian than I am, and this was actually a period that lasted less than a year, so it's not perfectly, but this was, of course, after the Paris Commune, after the French Revolution, and this is when they went around beheading everybody, including the king and the queen, and then finally the head of the movement of the Jacobins was himself beheaded, and that ended the French reign of terror. And these dates are arbitrary, but it feels like something really strange happened in that period, and we wanted to understand that. And Alex, my colleague, who was a public school teacher in the Oakland schools, overly modest, and she was teaching kids that we call them intellectually disabled. In the past, we called them retarded. And she was she's a Columbia University master's degree, brilliant person, but she wanted to work with the toughest kids in Oakland. And as soon as the school closures occurred, she was like, this is going to be bad for the kids I teach. She just knew it was going to be bad for the kids that she teached. One of the kids died. All of these kids fell behind. As she puts it, these are kids that are coming to school for the social interaction. They're not going to achieve a certain level of intellectual ability. And these are the kids that Governor Gavin Newsom wants us to believe he cares about more than any of you in this room, that anybody who votes Republican, that they're the compassionate ones, and yet they shut the schools down and hurt the most vulnerable kids in the society. So what's going on here? Why did the liberals, the people that said that they were the most open-minded people, become not only so close-minded, they started leading witch hunts against, literal, we call it cancel culture, where they would get people fired. They would get people dismissed out of universities, Jay Bhattacharya being just the most recent. And one of the characteristics of totalitarianism, and I just finished reading them, you can scold me if you've read it before, Hannah Arendt's wonderful Eichmann in Jerusalem, about when the Israelis kidnapped one of the Nazi kind of mid-level managers from Argentina brought him to Jerusalem, tried him in 1961. She had previously written this book called The Origins of Totalitarianism, about what creates totalitarianism. And the first thing she points out is that you can only get totalitarianism in societies where people are divided, where they're alienated and isolated and estranged from one another. So if you were to create the conditions for totalitarianism, you would want people to believe that there was some essential conflict between us over, let's say, race issues or around sex or gender. You would want to persuade the American people that we have these terrible divisions between us, that we just can't get along. You would want to keep people in their homes, separate from one another. You want to alienate and isolate kids, make people feel bad. That's the conditions of totalitarianism. The other part of it that she describes is making everything political, the pushing of politics into every aspect of life. You may have heard the famous slogan from the feminist movement was, "The personal is political." I mean, somebody should have said, no, it's not. And we don't want it to be. We want to be able to go home to our families and have people disagree about politics and remain a family. We don't want politics to invade the family. We don't want politics to invade sports. We would like to retain the recognition that there's real physical differences between men and women. And yet politics had to enter there. Politics had to enter the universities. It had to enter the media, to the point where the media, people in journalism had to decide, they had to justify their stories, if you're at the New York Times, according to whether it advanced the cause of fighting white supremacy. Journalism used to be about discovering the truth. Universities used to be about discovering the truth. They became entirely political enterprises in this period. So why is that? Like, why did that happen? It's not necessarily predictable. You look at the freest country in the world, people with the finest universities in the world. I mean, that's maybe the best thing that's going for us, is that when you look around, we don't have a lot of competitors globally. You know, the Chinese, you can't start a business there, and because they'll just confiscate it, they'll take it over. Nobody wants to do business in Europe. They're not creating businesses. You wouldn't dare start an AI company in Europe. It still remains here, and yet we've allowed basically every single institution in the society to be taken over by a very particular ideology. It's not like there's some universities that are far right or fascist or something. They're all identical woke ideology, and everybody knows what that is. But it's taken over every part of society. And the other thing that we know from totalitarianism is that it's also about the hunting and persecution of heretics, and in particular apostates, people that were once on side and then raised some hard questions, and they now need to be ostracized and punished. And having been there, I can tell you it's a very unpleasant thing, and you're set up as an example for everybody else. So totalitarianism, that push of a particular ideology into every aspect of life, and doing it by the hunting of heretics and apostates and dissenters in all of those areas to kick them out. And that's basically what we've seen over the last 12 years. But it's confusing at times, isn't it? Because people, when we did San Francisco, and we'd point out that this is a kind of extreme libertarianism where you're allowing people to smoke fentanyl, you're allowing the Sinaloa cartel to have its sales agents here illegally sell the most toxic, intoxicating, and deadly hard drugs ever made available to humankind, right here, just in our backyard, allowing people with schizophrenia, people with mental disorders, children, to smoke and use the hardest drugs in the world, and yet they want to mandate the COVID vaccine. They want to mandate a flu vaccine for everybody. Like, why is that? Like, what explains this crazy difference, this authoritarianism, this totalitarianism, this punish of dissent on the one hand, and kind of do whatever you want on the streets on the other? And we sort of see it all over the place. You see this demand, we must let doctors block the puberty of children. We have to allow that. It would be immoral to not stop the puberty of this child. It would be immoral to prevent the parents and this child from blocking their puberty through some of the hardest medical drugs we know, these puberty blocker drugs. It would be wrong not to give this boy estrogen and this girl testosterone. It would be wrong to deny that to them. That's the argument they make. And at the same time, if you use the wrong pronouns, you can be fired. So what is this? Why is it libertarian? Is it totalitarian? What is it? And it all becomes much more clear when you understand that there is a basic morality and ideology underneath it all. And it's a very simple one, and everybody in the room knows what it is, which is that there's some people that are victims by definition of who they are, their gender, their race, their disabilities. And then there's some people that are oppressors. That's y'all. Don't look at you, it's you. You're the one. I can see you. And then there's allies, which are the allies of the victims. Those are the special ones that are going to be shielded from the totalitarianism and that carry it out. And that's kind of it. It's very simple. There's certainly some complexity there, but that explains why, if you are a victim, everything should be given to you and nothing required. You should not be required to follow the law. That would be oppressive. If you want to smoke fentanyl and meth on the street, we should help you to do that, even if it means needing to revive you 10, 20, 30 times with 5 EMTs and a fire truck and 2 ambulances, as I normally see on the streets. That's because they're victims, and they must be treated that way. It's an iron rule. It's why there's no flexibility there. And if you're an oppressor, that means you need to be taxed more, you need to be restricted, your body needs to be, we need to control it, we need to control you. This is anarcho-tyranny. That's the best way to describe it. The person that invented the term is not a particularly pleasant person. I'm not agreeing with all of that person's views, but anarcho-tyranny is it. That is the system that the elites have attempted to impose. Now, you might think, well, that's all good because, there's a new president, he's got some promising nominees, and it has been very impressive, and it would be wrong not to recognize this moment. I still am breathing more easily than I was last year when I was with you. They handled the campaign was handled incredibly well. I mean, you may know that Trump has this very gifted chief of staff now, who's his campaign director. They put the nominees out, and you kind of go, wow, that's radical. I mean, Bobby Kennedy, I didn't see him getting a big position like that, right? I mean, Jay Bhattacharya, I was like, NIH, that can't be that big of an organization, can it? I mean, how big is it? $22 billion for Jay Bhattacharya? They put his face up on posters around Stanford so that he was the devil, and now he's sitting on $22 million. How's them apples, right? You can't help but, right? And nicest guy. I mean, you guys have probably met him, And Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, incredible, really impressive person. Met her the night before I was supposed to be here, and as impressive in person as you might imagine. And then you get some characters like Matt Gaetz, and you're like, wow, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that he's going to get through the Senate, but props on nominating him. And this, the senator said we're not going to do the Matt Gaetz one, so you can pull Matt Gaetz, and he withdrew with great, I thought, dignity. And I thought the whole thing it could have been a mess. It's the kind of thing that's a mess, and they handled it very well. And now Tom Cotton came out this morning, I think, and just said every single one of Trump's nominees is going to get confirmed. So that's pretty impressive. And it's impressive when you compare it to the total chaos of 8 years ago, and Trump himself has said that he really didn't know anybody in town. That was true, and people were like, you got to hire this guy as the defense attorney, and he was trying to pursue this particular vision of economic nationalism, which of course is the tradition that Alexander Hamilton created in the United States. It's a long, venerable tradition in the United States, up against a CIA that had been weaponized against him, FBI that had been weaponized against him. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing woke reign of terror. I mean, you got to hand it to them. There was a lot that happened. We reported, and some people had reported parts of it before, but I mean, the CIA got our intelligence community allies in Britain and Australia to what then I didn't know any of these terms until I reported on it, but to reverse target or bump the young guys, the couple of young guys in the Trump campaign, meet at the bar, your assets abroad, meet them in the bar, and they get them talking about Russia, and then they call back and they go, to the CIA, and they go, oh, we just happened to run into this guy and wanted you to know that it looks like there's something fishy going on around Russia. That's how it starts. Everyone thought it started with the Steele memo, which, is the PP memo. This wild conspiracy theory that was in this memo by a disgraced former MI6 agent named Christopher Steele, commissioned first by a Republican and then followed through by the Hillary campaign. Everyone thought that the Russiagate hoax had started with that. It started earlier with John Brennan, the CIA director under Obama, who did this reverse targeting. All of this is, we've reported on it, but it's really, I hope that we're going to get a lot more information on what occurred, along with the JFK files and the Epstein files. It's all psychological projection. That's the other thing you realize now. Now one of the big lessons of it all is you all know your basic psychology of like projection. Someone says, why are you always mean to everybody or whatever? And it's like, well, you're the mean one and you're projecting. And the idea is that you don't really know you're doing it. This is Jung and Freud. I don't need to tell you a lot about it, but that's called projection. That goes on every time. It's incredible. It's like, just look at what they say and then they're doing it. It's like, it's such a perfect, it was like, it would dawn on me because everyone became obsessed with foreign election interference. Remember after 2016, Russian foreign election interference. It was like, isn't that like what the CIA does abroad is foreign election interference? Like, isn't that the whole job? Yeah, there's some spying, but like since we changed the results of the 1947 Italian elections, that's kind of what the job of the CIA is. It's foreign election interference. And then when it got controversial in the 70s, they said we're going to move a lot of it to USAID, and then they're going to fund a Republican think tank and a Democrat think tank called National Endowment for Democracy, and they would have the National Democrat Institute and the International Republican Institute, and they were going to, influence foreign elections ostensibly above ground, but as intermediaries of the CIA, or what they call them, cutouts of the CIA. So that was all, needless to say, deeply illegal to use the CIA to smear an incoming president as a Russian asset. It's such a crazy conspiracy theory when you look back on it now. It's kind of amazing that so many people believed it, including a lot of people I'm related to and love very much. In case you're listening, still love, but that was a dumb conspiracy theory, and everybody bought it. And it went on for so long. It was crazy, and the media was amazing. There was a Columbia Journalism Review article that looked at how the media was part of it. Like, you can't, like, it's the intelligence community and the media, and you kind of get this picture. You're like, wow, there's like a secret government. There really is. There's a secret government. There's the people we vote for, and then as I've discovered, including on the UFO topic, which apparently some people want me to talk about at the end, the members of Congress aren't totally running the government. Like, they're supposed to have oversight, but they really don't. And then speaking of like the whole thing with Trump, remember, it was a sex blackmail operation. Remember, there was these hookers apparently that peed on him on a bed. It's an amazing story. Like, if you make it into a Hollywood movie, people would be like, yeah, that's just not, like, that's not a thing. Like, you can't do that. But that was the idea. I remember Melania, like, when she first heard about it, she's like, no, he's a germaphobe. He would never, She's like, is he faithful? I don't know, but not that. Right? So, like, it was a sex, so it's projection. Like, literally, what was the Jeffrey Epstein thing about? What was that about? Well, it was a sex blackmail operation. Like, I'm like 90% sex blackmail operation. I'm like UFOs, way lower levels of certainty of what that is. But Jeffrey Epstein, sex blackmail operation. Is it weird that the current CIA director was at Jeffrey Epstein's house a lot? I don't know. Does that seem weird to you? Just a coincidence, right? He was in the neighborhood. All the ties to Mossad, just a quinkydink, you know? So, all right, so just to kind of recap, we have the CIA interfering in the 2016 election and then running an active disinformation campaign based on a conspiracy theory that's a projection of a sex blackmail operation that was currently, at the time, being run by the CIA. So that's one of the things that happened during the woke reign of terror. It's certainly not the only thing, and a lot of it's just not coordinated. I mean, what was, 2013, why 2013? Why, what was going on? I mean, so some generational stuff, that's when the millennials, the most important generation, the special ones, those of you that are here, because you're the children of the boomers, and so you're like really special. But the millennials kind of get, they get social media accounts and they become obnoxious, like awful, right? Calling everybody racist and fascist. Like they got out of Wesleyan and then it was like everybody was a racist and fascist, like as soon as they got on Twitter. And then the little mobs form, and then the way social media works is that you reinforced it and your narcissism is just being rewarded, and so you get these mobs, and it's just intensified by this crazy social media. Everyone's anxious because you feel like you're in a fishbowl. And just, on that alone, I meet like really amazing, you meet incredible intellectuals. Like journalists, brilliant people, and I'll be like, hey, how are you? And whatever. And they're like, oh God, you've probably seen, they're coming after me on X, on Twitter all the time. And you're just like, I didn't see that at all. Like I didn't know. But the experience of when you're being attacked on social media, it's just like, we're not evolved for that shit, It's like terrifying. You're like, I think 5 people saw it, They could be my neighbors. Or 1,000 retweets of something. Someone attacked me and they had like 1,000 retweets. I was like, oh God, So there's that. And then if you're scared of being bullied, I think we all know what cowardly, shitty people do when you're scared of being bullied, which is that you go out and you bully other people, right? So you get that awfulness. Speaking of Eichmann in Jerusalem about the Nazis, it's just a festival of awfulness. So, you kind of get this crazy moment, and then you see Zach Goldberg at Tablet did these studies of when did you really start seeing mentions of racism, white supremacy, white fragility, all the jargon, all the garbage jargon, and he would count them like through Google search, right? Like how many times the media, and he'd create these graphs and it would just be flat up until 2013, and then it just skyrocketed. So you kind of go, that was when the millennials got their iPhones and their accounts. That was when Twitter started taking off. Was something else. It was also Black Lives Matter, and so Black Lives Matter starts in 2013. I have some people for the next book we're working on talking about how at Occupy, which was really radical. It was like, they weren't just like, oh, I think that we shouldn't have as big of bonuses for the bankers. They were like, there shouldn't be banks, like there shouldn't be capitalism at all. Like that's who ran that. And there was a lot of talk there, according to some of my sources, about like white fragility and white privilege and all of the woke jargon. And then this is all happening before you get Trump, and then Trump comes in, and for people that don't believe in God or the devil anymore, Orange Man bad, that was it. It was just the new secular devil, You talk to people, you talk to the progressives, and they're like, I don't believe in God or the devil, but Trump, from the underworld, the smell of sulfur follows him. It's crazy. You'd be kind of like, well, okay, well, fair, but, is just asking questions, but seems like he's saying he doesn't want to like invade countries anymore. It seems like that's kind of I don't know, it's like, I think that the left was talking about that like a couple minutes ago. You kind of go through the list. So now the right, the Republicans, they're pro-free speech, they're anti-war, they're defending gay kids from being castrated. And that's sorry, not to put a fine point on it, but he's saying he's not going to privatize Medicare and Social Security. They handled that. They did that campaign. They just did. Like at the moment, I could see like all the progressive Democrats in my life being like, well, I don't know, the abortion thing still, he's just whatever. And then Melania comes out with her book, and it's like Melania Trump's in favor of abortion. So like the campaign was like signaled brilliantly to swing voters that was off the table and the entitlements were off the table. And so maybe not views that all of you share, but a sense of Trump rising to finishing this arc, this narrative arc that got started, and really closing the cell, which I didn't see him do at the Republican National Convention. You know, he had like a 20-minute speech, and it took him like an hour because he had to keep interrupting himself to attack random people. You know, you were like, I don't know, it's not. That first night he showed up, he's got like a little teary-eyed. I'm not saying he was crying, but he was a little bit emotional that first night. And I was with my wife, and you know, she's Democrat, hates Trump, blah blah blah. She kind of looks. I look over at her, and she's kind of. You could see her kind of softening on him, you know. And then it was like then the speech, and it was like, okay, it didn't close it, but the campaign, it was they're coming into power much more powerful than they would have been had they won re-election in 2020. You know, it's and he's got people, and you know, look, guy's now 79, right? And so he starts in 71 when this whole crazy journey began. And I'm not saying he's mellowed, but certainly showed a lot of energy. But he's certainly got people and is listening to it. And it appears that they want to govern with a majority. You know, and if you're a soccer fan like me, you know, it's all about possession. It's all about trying to keep that majority. I don't see any reason why they couldn't actually, you know, 2 years from now, you're supposed to lose the House or the Senate or whatever. But, you know, my son, you know, my son voted for Trump, you know, called me, you know, raised by very liberal parents. You know, my whole family is just a microcosm. My daughter voted for Kamala. You know, my ex-wife voted for Kamala. My wife voted for, actually, my wife wrote me in. She couldn't, I know. She's very sweet. No, she just did. She did it right there in front of me. She's like, I don't like them, so I got one vote. But yeah, I mean, the whole family split like a lot of like you'd expect demographically, and that's important. I mean, a lot of what was going on over the last 12 years, to use that period, we just put men down, you know, put boys and men down. Masculinity is only toxic, you know, it's only toxic masculinity. You know, the Daniel Penny, the white former Marine Corps officer, he did what, yeah. I mean, he did his job. You know, it's like, you kind of go, like, men are, I mean, look, we're not good for everything, but like that one, like you want that one, you want basic security. It's like right there on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, that's what men are for, at bottom. And then we were like, no, that's all toxic, you know? And it just came out. I mean, you saw it. So that, you know, Jordan Neely, maybe mentally ill, maybe just an addict, who knows? You know, I think he'd been arrested 40-some times. He walks into the subway, and this is all witness testimony in the trial, and he said, I will kill somebody. And then he said, I will go to prison. I'm tired of it. I will kill somebody. Well, it turns out that it is, there are limits to freedom of speech. Jane was like, you're going to talk about free speech tonight. I haven't got there yet. There are limits to freedom of speech. You can't lie to someone to steal their money. You can't intentionally destroy someone's reputation in order to hurt them financially, although the bar is very high in the United States, lower in Britain. And then you can't threaten to kill anybody. Thank God for that. You can't threaten to kill anybody, because at that point, the words, you're now into physical realities. And similarly, the Supreme Court, in its truly, truly infinite wisdom on free speech, draws the line not at incitement to violence, but at the immediate incitement to violence. You can say, because of course if you do any, because so many things can count as incitement to violence, but you could say, if I say I don't want any immigrants, you know, in this town anymore, and some people might read that as incitement of violence, but it's protected. But you can't then say, everybody meet me at that apartment building and light it on fire. That would be crossing the line. It's not that hard. And that's what we've been seeing, and it's been coming from top on bottom. You see, the cancel culture all turned out to be prelude for censorship, right? We were all getting prepared for this. And then there was a top-down part of it. You know, just every time we would discover some new censorship operation, including the one up the road. Is Stanford up the road? Down the road? Up the road. Up the road. You always have to find one of them. There was 4 groups that are the core of the Censorship Industrial Complex that the Department of Homeland Security asked to engage in this censorship advocacy against Twitter and all the social media platforms. One of them was the Stanford Internet Observatory. And I immediately identified this particular person there, not because I knew anything about her background, but because she's the smartest person in the room. And you guys will love her because she's a huge vaccine advocate. And she was at Stanford Internet Observatory, and so I criticized her in my congressional testimony in March of last year when I testified for the first time with Matt Taibbi about the Twitter files. Then I went on Joe Rogan, and when I testified again and talked about her, then I went on Joe Rogan and talked about her. That got her attention. Because congressional testimony, you're like, whatever, but if you go on Joe Rogan and you talk about it. So she's been very mad at me, and she's been out there criticizing me, and I'm all over her book, being very mad and saying that I was the mean one trying to, stop her from censoring millions of people. But it is, we are in a really different place. Since I've seen you last, the main donor to the Stanford Internet Observatory said, I don't want to fund censorship anymore. Yeah. The media coverage was like because of course the media wants censorship. Like, I think you all know that they like censorship. They need censorship to survive. And the media was very much like, well, Stanford Internet Observatory will still exist. It just won't do the flagging of misinformation and hate speech anymore. But I don't know if it's going to survive because it was kind of their main jam, demanding censorship. So where are we at in the free speech battle? I mean, we're on the front foot now. When we first testified in March of last year, I was just disoriented. I was like, this is very confusing to me because the people that I thought were for free speech are defending censorship, and they're asking me who my sources are. Like, what the hell is going on? What happened to the Democrats? That's, invasion of the brain snatchers for the Democrats. It was a strange experience, and I had already left the party in the spring of 2021. As soon as I finished San Francisco, I was like two things. I finished the book, is in the publisher. I'm going to change my party registration because this is an evil party and I can't be a part of it anymore. And then I reached out to Jackie Berlin, who's one of the moms whose son is being trapped on the streets in his fentanyl addiction. And we started Stop Fentanyl Deaths, and then we started California Peace Coalition, and now we're at North America Recovers. But we're in a much better place than we were then. At that point, the Censorship Industrial Complex was in full bloom, and we had just uncovered it. I would say the peak of the censorship was April of 2022 when Barack Obama came to Stanford to give a speech making the case for mass censorship by the US government 1 week before, and in order to prepare the ground for, the announcement of the Disinformation Governance Board. Which, because the people that are doing all this, they read 1984 not as a warning, but as a guidebook, right? So they found that in there. I mean, I didn't know the Disinformation Governance Board was part of the Big Brother operation. So that was the high moment. Then the Twitter files were about 9 months later. We discovered the disinformation operation run by the FBI to brainwash the social media platforms, and the journalists at the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation once again, when in fact FBI had verified it within hours of getting it in December 2019 and then ran a disinformation operation through the Aspen Institute, which is a US government contractor, and which now, since I've seen you last, Mark Zuckerberg has actually apologized for. As they saw the wind blowing, somewhere around when Trump was being threatened with incarceration and being shot at, Zuckerberg thought, now it might be a good time to apologize for some of that censorship business. So he apologized for the Hunter Biden laptop. He apologized for censoring often true stories of vaccine side effects in the language of Facebook. They were censoring even though their own people said this will backfire and people will not trust you, and indeed, correctly so. And then he apologized for censoring the lab leak, which now I'm like 90% on that one too, and most Americans think it came from a lab. And so we're in a much better place. We defeated censorship legislation in Ireland, which is really exciting, yeah. And then we defeated censorship legislation in Australia. So we've got some big victories. Both deeply, deeply satisfying. The Ireland one in particular was hard fought and also weird in that, there was a politician who was expected to have a good political career. She came from a political family. She was the justice minister, which is like their attorney general. And she just kept pushing this legislation, even though it's unpopular. Like, people don't like, even very woke people, like even normies, when they think about it for a while and you call it censorship a few times, they kind of go, yeah, it doesn't sound right. But she just kept pushing it. And so I can't prove it, but I see around the world a kind of similar dark energy, some invisible dark force that keeps pushing the politicians to demand things that make them less popular, which is not normal behavior for politicians. Normally, like, I decided I like weather vane politicians, you know? I like the politicians where it's like the opinion changes and they change. When they keep pushing unpopular censorship legislation, it feels like there's something else going on. And I can't prove it, but we sense it almost everywhere in the world. And they do weird things, like this person I was mentioning at Stanford Internet Observatory sort of mentioned that she had worked at the CIA before getting there at Stanford Internet Observatory. Just by the way, you know. The top censor in Australia is an American, and then when she arrives in Australia, she just sort of mentioned to a local magazine that she had been recruited for the CIA. But she turned him down. So then why would you mention that then? Kind of weird. You talk to people in the IC and they kind of laugh and they go, yeah, that's kind of, they were worried that it was going to come out that they were CIA, and they wanted to say, no, I was recruited, but I didn't do it. Suspicious stuff like that, you know, where, you know, you're not wrong to have theories, given what we now know about what the CIA and the FBI did to construct this elaborate disinformation effort to convince everybody that Trump was in a sex blackmail operation run by the Russian government. Once you have some appreciation about how large the lies have to be in order for people to believe them. They must be large. Once you've committed to these lies, as I've seen with my loved ones, it's very hard to get them to back off it. I'm sure there was something with the Russians. Something must have been there. Well, they couldn't find anything, Mom, you know, but something, you know, and it's just not there. And I love everybody, but it's like there's nothing there, and so we're in a much better place in terms of seeing them and what they're doing, because they do the same thing everywhere. They create these little NGOs. They're going to flag the misinformation and hate speech. They're going to then put pressure on the social media companies. The government then has their Justice Department or their judiciary or their courts. It's slightly different in Brazil than it is in Canada, than in European Union, than in Australia, than in Ireland. But it's the same kind of racket, and it all emerged after 2016. Amazing coincidence. It's counter-populism. The people that are doing it were involved in counterterrorism. The people that were doing it were overthrowing governments in Arab Spring, and then they were overthrowing governments in Eastern Europe as part of the color revolutions. It's the same people. The current head of NPR, who before that was the head of Wikipedia, and sometimes they're just kind of too woke. Like, I kind of look at them and I go, she seems like she's lying about how woke she is. They were using a lot of the wokeism. I'm not saying it's not real and that people don't believe it, they do, but we would see people that had clear relations. This is a person who was accused by a friend of hers in Yemen of having been CIA. That's the current head of NPR, who is the head of Wikipedia, accused by her friend in Yemen of being CIA, to which she responded, "Oh, how dare you? We were at your house having dinner." And he was just like, "Yeah, I just think you're CIA." And most of us were like, "Looks like it." And so wokeism is authentic, it's real, it's a real disorder in the society, but it had this inorganic state push as well. And the good news is, that's actually the easiest stuff to get rid of. All we need to do is defund the thought police. And that got announced today, at least one part of it. One part of the State Department's GEC, Global Education Center, that was running disinformation operations, is now voluntarily self-disbanding. So I do think we're going to win. Are we nearing my end? No? We were going to do UFOs before we stopped. The woke reign of terror, I think, is over. I think it ends between the election and the inauguration. That's a pretty good, thank God. It was a long, brutal 12 years, guys. Some of us lost all our friends. But I do think that that's over. Now, here's the bad news. Wokeism as the governing ideology of the deep state, the administrative state, whatever you want to call it, of the state of California, Hollywood, and all the newspapers, and all the health and medical organizations, and kind of all the professionals, basically, in society, all the professionals and administrators. Sadly, it's all in place and pretty intact, given the conversations I overhear in my Berkeley Hills neighborhood. Wokeism is still the dominant ideology of the ruling class of the society. But what's happened is that there has emerged a new counter-elite. And it is finally, we have an intra-elite struggle in the society that's now open, it's joined, everybody knows who it is. It's Elon Musk, it's Peter Thiel, it's Mark Andreessen, and you finally, right? Because finally, every new era defined by a new technology, a new industry, economic change, whether it's 1880 to 1920, which is the period of urbanization and industrialization in the United States, or the New Deal era, or the post-war era, or now, is defined by a technological revolution whereby those entrepreneurs eventually step into politics and engage in politics and fix all the things that are in the way of being an entrepreneurial society. That's how it should work, and that's what happened, and that's why Elon spent over $200 million to elect President Trump, and why they're going to make deep cuts to the censorship state, to the thought police, to the people that were weaponizing government. Kash Patel is an extremely serious person. He is absolutely intending to clean house. If you're listening to me, Kash, I want the documents first, all right? I love Matt and Barry, but I want the documents. So there are a couple documents they haven't released yet. Like, we don't know, like, what was the CIA doing with JFK? That's an interesting one. Maybe nothing there, but it's funny how they won't release the documents. Jeffrey Epstein, I mean, that's going to be exciting. P. Diddy. I'm sure he had one-way mirrors on all those bedrooms just for his own kicks. I'm sure it had nothing to do with entrapping celebrities and making them be woke monsters over the last reign of terror. It'll be interesting to find out. All right, I'll close with UFOs because people are interested. So I don't know what they are. All right, I don't know what they are. But I don't know. They often don't look like drones, in northeast Colorado. So I did testify because someone came to me and said that there is this massive government program called Immaculate Constellation of not a few good photos, but many good photos, hundreds, probably thousands of videos, high resolution, of incredible phenomena that we are now starting to see a little bit more of, but doing incredible things that are hard to explain as plasma or drones or foreign tech. And I don't know that anybody knows. I don't really know if anybody knows. And there's some people that think they know, and there was 4 of us that testified. And the 2 gentlemen to my right who were in government and were in intelligence, and they say that they're non-humans. That's what they say. And then the former NASA guy, Mike Gold, super nice guy, and me, we say we don't know. But we're in the midst of a very interesting UFO flap, as they called it, to use a little vintage UFO language with you. But we had one where I grew up in northeastern Colorado a couple of years ago, and people thought they were drones because they made these noises of drones, but they could never really get good photographs of them. They could never shoot any of them down. We just had one in Britain that was very similar. Now we're having one in New Jersey. And people are making things up, but they don't know what it is, and it's a very interesting moment. It's also all happening in New Jersey right next to Bedminster. So if someone's trying to talk to Trump, apparently the phones aren't working, or they're just sending little drones over. It's difficult to imagine the Chinese or the Russians doing this, because it would be you could easily construe it as an act of war. You're having we're talking dozens and dozens of these funny drones. The governor just came out yesterday and said that they have been flying drones to get close to them, and as soon as they get close to them, they disappear. There's reports of them coming off the water, out of the water. So in the olden days, the old UFO days, it was all about discs. And then in the 90s, the triangles were in. And now it's all about the orbs. So it's just a fashion, I guess. They change ships just like we do. But I don't know. But what I do know, and I'm 100% confident on, is that they know a lot more than they're telling us. And the reason I'm so confident about this is that they've said so. And Trump said so, Obama said so. The people that I really don't trust and were clearly, I think, broke the law in terms of spying on Trump, John Brennan, former CIA director, Clapper, the former head of national intelligence, they're all there. The members of Congress that were there, and it was 2 combined subcommittees, they all think it's non-humans, and one of them was like, I think there's hybrids, and I was like, all right, maybe. So, but what I do know is that they're not telling us a lot, and I held up this redacted, there's a briefing that was done, a PowerPoint by the UFO people in the government, and they were like, there's like this page, and it's like almost all blacked out, and it's like, we have collected blank reports over blank years, and we have 3 possibilities. Number 1, blank. Number 2, natural phenomenon. Number 3, blank. So I think this is silly, because I think that we can handle it, We could handle it when we found out that the Earth didn't revolve around the sun. We handled it when we found that the Earth is round and there's all these other people on it. I think we can handle it if it's what a lot of people think it is, and it's some other form of intelligence. Then I think we can handle it. And if it's some new plasma, or if it's Chinese drones, I think we can handle that too. But it's not like my opinion. We have this little thing called the Constitution, and it's right there in Article 1 that says that our government works for us, and that they must, by law, by the Constitution, tell our representatives what's going on, and they're not doing that. And the members of Congress were very angry, and they think there's a secret government, and they don't like it, and they want to know what they know, because this country is so darn special, you guys, and we've got to get rid of the woke totalitarianism that's embedded in every single one of our institutions. That's the work for the next 12 years or 20 or however long it takes. But we're really set up to do it. We have the greatest constitution in the world. We have this First Amendment that is so special. If you're interested in reading a beautiful book, a beautiful history of free speech, it's called Free Speech by Jacob Machangama. If you go to Amazon and you type in Free Speech Jacob M, it should pop up. And it's like you read this whole book, and Socrates, and then you get through the French Revolution, all these things, and then you get to the Europe battles, and then you get to the invention of the United States of America, and it's just the best part of the book. And the guy's Danish, like he's not like rah rah America or whatever, and it's because the creators of this country figured out something really important, which is that we make the government, we speak. That comes first. It's the First Amendment. It's the first right that we speak and we form the government. The government doesn't give us the right to speak. And that's how it worked in Europe, is that it would be like, oh, king, could I please offer a criticism? And then years would go by and the king would be like, okay, I'll hear you. And that was it for like hundreds of years. Can you imagine? By the time these guys get here, they're like, no, we're going to do it totally differently. And they didn't want a constitution unless they could have freedom of speech. And that's what we have. And even though the Europeans think they're better than us, they really do, you know? They're nice about it, but when the First Amendment comes up, they're kind of like, yeah, you guys did that's better, the way you guys did it. So we have that. We finally have the greatest free speech social media platform the world has ever seen in X. It's amazing. There was only one person in the world that was powerful enough to stand up to the deep state and the intelligence community. There's only one person, and it had to be the richest man in the world and somebody with gigantic balls as well, I must say. It helps that he is a massive defense contractor providing all of our space services, and that he's literally, like, he was like, you know, campaigning to elect Trump, and he's like landing rockets in this crane and, you know, kind of figuring out content moderation. I got a couple of guys from X reached out to me. Well, I think while they're landing rockets, and he was like campaigning for Trump, and they were like, "Oh, we wanted to get in touch with you." Like a couple of employees from X, and I was like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And they're like, "Elon noticed that your blue check mark was missing. Apparently, because you were updating your photo, why haven't you linked your business account to your personal account?" And I was like, "Isn't he landing rockets like right now? Like, that's weird." He's not a single person, I don't think. You know, at first, when the Gutenberg movable type printing press, which is all of the great inventions, is a combination of inventions. When that first comes out, the Catholic Church was delighted. You know, we can just crank the Bibles out now for everybody. And that went for like 50, 75 years. And then there was this guy, Martin Luther, and he was like, I can use a printing press too. And I'm going to denounce them. And sure enough, and that started a revolution. And the technology in its early days is captured by the elite, but like all great technologies, it slips out of their hands like fire did from the gods through Prometheus. And you know, the best history of the printing press now, it was an Oxford history. She's like, we need to go understand, you know, so you kind of go back to these episodes. How important was that? Because we all knew that it helped with the Protestant Revolution because of Martin Luther, and they printed all the theses denouncing the Catholic Church. She was like, she comes back and whatever, you know, 10 years in the library, comes back and she's like, it was a lot more important than we thought, you know? Because it was the Protestant Revolution, it was the Counter-Revolution, the Inquisition, then it was the Scientific Revolution, and then it was like liberal democratic revolutions and wars, and then it was the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it was absolutely game-changing. And this is as big. You know, if the truth can get out from the people without anybody getting in the way of it and mediating it, it's what gives me hope. Because I do think there are a bunch of people in our society, whether they're in government or out, who want anarcho-tyranny. They see the world in this hideously simplistic, psychopathic, narcissistic way, where they're all good. They're 100% good. There's nothing bad in them. The people they oppose are 100% evil and bad. They don't have any more devils religiously, so they invent the new ones. They sacralize people, and they dehumanize in so many ways. They leave addicts on the street to die in horrid ways. They do awful things to the bodies of anxious, stressed out, and confused children in the name of liberation. They mandate experimental drugs that you must take or be ostracized from society. Those people are still there. But what we have on our side is freedom of speech and a belief in the pillars of civilization, and that gives me hope. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Very nice.
Michael, I want to start with this, and that's a quote I have. Is it Emily Burns from Brownstone? I don't know if you know her, but she says censorship harms everyone. It targets, it mutes, but its real victims are those whom it blinds. And my question is, how do we measure the real price of censorship?
Wow. I get disoriented again because it's so shocking what took place in our country in the censorship that occurred. And there was so much of it, and it was tied up with the disinformation, because not always, but I would say 75 to 90% of the time, they spread disinformation and then demanded censorship on the basis of the disinformation. So in order to demand the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop, they first had to say that it was a Russian influence operation. In order to demand the censorship of COVID origins, that it might have came from a lab, they first had to falsely claim that they knew that it had not come from a lab, which of course they could not do. And so the loss of trust by the society in our institutions is enormous. Trust in our health and medical system was 72% in the spring of 2020. It's 40% today. And that's a rough one. You're not inclined to distrust the health and medical system because your lives depend on it. So your cognitive bias is on the side of wanting to trust. Trust in the news media has declined now to 31% of the public support the news media. So trust is like everything in a society. I believe that you want social trust. I also think it's great to be skeptical and libertarian and questioning, but social trust is that thing that allows you to do business deals with a handshake. It makes all of life a lot easier if you have trust. And so it's almost incalculable. It could be trillions, because if the society becomes a low trust society, as I was saying before, it then becomes vulnerable to totalitarianism. It's easier to control people when they're isolated from each other, and when people lie about each other.
Okay. There are several people who are interested in Brazil, and I know Brazil has a special place in your heart. You live there. You've been with Bolsonaro. I guess I would like to say that Rumble left before X, is that right?
Yeah.
The head of Getter was stopped at the airport and asked to sign something. Could you speak about your experience in Brazil and where things stand now?
Sure. I didn't really totally trust Elon until Brazil. I lived in Brazil when I was a very radical leftist. I fell in love with the socialist movement there, which is called the Workers' Party. The current president, Lula, was admired in part because he was socialist, but he was ostensibly in favor of freedom. I interviewed him in 1994 in his office in Sao Paulo, and I asked him directly if he supported freedom of speech, and he assured me that he did. So I basically went down in the spring, we looked in the Twitter files, we found all this evidence of just huge demands for censorship by the government. Radical demands, because it wasn't just take down that post. It was ban that person from every single social media platform. It would be it's the most totalitarian thing, because if you're a journalist or a politician, you can't have your profession if you're off social media. You can't survive. That's even before they take away your bank account, right? That's before they freeze your bank account or deprive you of bank account. So it was so radical. And so we just I published the Twitter files as the biggest story in Brazil, right away. And then 2 days later, Elon starts calling the main censor in Brazil Voldemort. It's a little bit we're trying to keep it high class around here, Elon, trying to keep it classy, but that's how he rolls. I'm 12 days older than him, by the way. That's why I feel able to kind of tell him, hey, calm it down, dude. Nah, I don't say that. But yeah, he really threw down on Brazil. It was amazing. Ultimately, and then he got, Congress released a lot of internal files. It was all just worse than we thought. They don't play games, I'll tell you that, in Brazil. And this is why our work is not done. They just confiscated all of Starlink assets in Brazil. It was just, I don't think Elon saw that coming. I don't think he was you have to remember Starlink, it's the satellites, right? The ones that they mistake for UFOs a lot. But it's these low orbit satellites that provide this really incredible cell phone service. Now, even direct to your phone, but in the airplanes, it's that's why he's going to be the first trillionaire. And Brazil's perfect for it, because you don't have, you have this Amazon Brazil's larger than the continental United States. The Amazon itself is about the size of the United States. It's like, they're very big. And that, like, Brazil's, whatever, it's like the 8th largest economy, but it was like one of the biggest for Starlink. And they just took it all. Like, they were just not messing around. It was like, well, that's a different company. And they're like, yeah, we don't care. We're just taking it all. So we had a very tough decision to make. And at the end, it was like, there's like 300 people they wanted to ban. And it was either allow that to occur or lose X for 22 million Brazilians. And they ultimately made the call to keep X online and go along with the banning. And so we're still in a bad fight there. It's not obvious what to do about it, so we're not out of the woods yet. We're in a bad way still in Europe. We're in a bad way in Brazil. Hopefully Trudeau gets kicked out next year. And then we'll be in a good way in Canada. We're succeeding here, but we're at least we're on the offensive. But Brazil was. I would say that Elon did much more than anybody else and as much as he could without completely destroying his business.
Are you still under investigation in Brazil?
Yes, I am. Proudly so. I'm under criminal investigation in Brazil. Yeah.
That's exciting.
The women in my life did not want me to go, but I went back and it helps when the former president is like, bring him up. And I was like, okay. So I went up on the sound truck with the former president and he was like, he's like shouting in Portuguese, and there was like a couple of us up there. And I love, part of it was that if you've been to Brazil, this is a really profound people. Like, they're very emotional. Like, the men cry all the time. It's like a sign of masculinity, like in pride for men. Like, I'm so manly, I cry all the time. And he was like up there and he's just crying and he was just talking about censorship and he's like, and I'm up here with, he's like, is it Michael Shellenberger? I was like, yeah, I'm up here with Shellenberger, and the crowd is, knows the Twitter files. So I felt, I am under criminal investigation, but I went back but I felt protected genuinely by the people. At the end of the day, these laws, they're just pieces of paper enforced by people. And so if the people are on your side, then you have a degree of security. And that's why that's the main event, is possession football. Keep the people on your side, retain your majority and grow it, and we'll be able to push this wokeism back.
Okay. Gosh, we have so many good questions. Michael, I'm not going to be able to get to them all, but you are really invigorating the minds of this audience, and that's pretty great stuff. Boy, we have everything from UFOs to California issues. Let me ask, one of the things people want to know is about Blue Sky. Do you have any comments about Blue Sky?
Blue cry.
Blue.
Oh, Blue
they're
cry.
Really, they're bragging about something like 3,000 complaints an hour or something. It's it's like a whining convention.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, in the accounting of how much of the demand for censorship is like organic and grassroots and authentic and from the people, and how much of it is from like the CIA and the intelligence community and the baddies, Blue Sky is good evidence that there is genuine demand for censorship by the people. It's really creepy and disturbing. I thought the other interesting thing, Blue Sky is this alternative to Twitter. It's a copycat thing. A lot of lefties went there. And they basically all started narking on each other right away for not being like woke enough, and no, I mean, seriously. And they were like, oh, that's intolerant. I've had 2 TikTok videos taken down because I said there's 2 sexes and you can't change them. Like, that was it. Like,
well, wait,
like
whoa. Please, we don't talk like that here.
Yeah. 2 sexes, can't change them. But that's like considered intolerant at Blue Cry. And so I kind of think it's great. The great thing about the left is that it's just become, just this kind of this nihilistic, world-destroying, civilization-destroying, human-hating energy, and it's not containable. And so you end up attacking like moderates and liberals and people on your side, and thank God that it does that, because that ends up destroying it. They end up destroying themselves. So yes, Blue Cry is a fun little petri dish to stare at and study.
Okay, that's great.
I did think it was interesting. You guys may know, as long as we're dishing a little bit. There's this person named Taylor Lorenz. God, don't you love her? She's amazing. So she comes out and she's like cheering the death of the murder of the CEO. Like, this is someone that was like crying all the time about people being mean to her on X. She's literally calling for the murder of this guy. That's called cluster B psychiatric or cluster B personality disorders. Cluster B personality disorders explains an enormous amount of these behaviors. Cluster B personality disorders, it's in the DSM, it's psychopathy, narcissism, histrionic, which is like the politically correct word for hysterical, and borderline personality disorders, which are like the most difficult people you've ever met. And like one of the characteristics of the cluster B is that it's excess empathy for some people and like no empathy for others. Like, you can see the pattern there, right? It's also got another good one I love, reality impairment. Like that's one for our team, that they have reality impairment, but it's really characterized by entitlement and grandiosity. You know, the grandiosity, we're going to remake the whole economy on renewables. You know, we're going to turn this boy's body into a woman's body. That's grandiosity. And then entitlement is, I should be able to do that. We should be able to do that. Remake human life. Like, it's madness. I mean, it's crazy. It's like total hubris and so, but those are all, I'm not saying that they're all have these, I'm not diagnosing anybody, but those traits are very much alive in the blue cry people.
Yeah, I think you're actually quite a good psychologist there. I'm actually impressed. You've got all the cluster Bs, and then we added Trump derangement syndrome, we had TDS, and then we combined it with what I coined as curiosity deficit disorder, and boom!
Yes.
Right? It's been a lot of fun.
I noticed that too.
Okay, so we have some California questions, including about your future, right? He's already shaking.
No, we haven't even talked about it, so there's that's boring, nothing there.
Well, the questions are, is there hope for cleaning up California? Obviously, the question is, would you run for governor again? Should we try to recall Newsom?
That's very nice. No. I have no answers. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. I broke it. Is it back? Yeah. We haven't talked about it. Helen and I haven't talked about the run, so I have nothing to say, and I have no idea if anybody. I don't know how right-wing you can be and win in California. That's the question. So, I mean, I'm still in favor of marijuana decriminalization, so does that count? But I mean, for me, if I were to run again, like, you would have to end this atrocious, horrific medical experimentation on children's bodies. It's so immoral. I can't even believe it's happening. It's like a David Cronenberg movie, but you can't believe it's actually happening in real life. So but now, I think the majority of the public is moving on that issue too. I mean, they've banned that stuff in Britain. It's all gone. They're banning it in Sweden and Finland and all the liberal European countries. But for me, I wouldn't want to just run on the housing is too expensive or something like that. I think you have to deal with the big moral issues in your society. We're just killing people we're killing mentally ill and drug addicted people on the streets. It's just crazy. We're taking the most vulnerable people in the society, who are the people with often highly treatable psychiatric disorders, and we're killing them or destroying their bodies. It's so awful that I don't feel moral paying taxes in this state. It's that horrible. So for me, it's more like, I don't know, governor, not governor, but we have to stop that. We have to bring everybody inside. They can get treatment. We have to stop experimenting on the bodies of children, because that is just we're really far gone as a civilization when you're doing those kinds of things and then demanding that people be censored if they dare to disagree with those atrocities. So that's what I would say about it.
It's almost an undescribable evil. What are your thoughts on the TikTok ban? What do you think the fate of all that is?
I'm really ambivalent. I mean, there's two issues, obviously. One of them is freedom of speech, and then the other one is national interest. I mean, I don't love that the Chinese military know more about our kids. Sorry. Is it on now? I'm going to stop touching it. I don't love that the Chinese military know more about our children than we do. Like, there's just something about that rubs me the wrong way. I do believe in the nation state. I do think that citizens have more loyalty to us. I do think that there are situations where those relationships with the state are actually okay. Like, I do think that the FBI, I mean, this is part of the issue, is like those guys spending time trying to censor you on vaccines and COVID origins, it's not just illegal and immoral. They're not fighting child pornographers. Like, we actually have a shortage of cybersecurity people in this country. Like, we need more IT people. So why in the hell are you getting the best and brightest of Stanford University undergrads to go and flag people for their wrong speak when we need those kids to be fighting the bad guys online? So, I mean, that's kind of the fundamental. I mean, I would like for TikTok actually to continue to exist, because I do think we need more free speech platforms. We shouldn't be totally reliant on Elon Musk and X. Not because I do trust him and believe in it, but I also think you want some diversity of platforms. So we have Substack now, we have X. TikTok is engaged in awful censorship. I think, ultimately we should have a law that says if you have Section 230, social media liability protection, which is what that law gives, then you should allow adults to decide on their own legal content. That should be the standard. We do recognize the difference between publishers and social media platforms. If you want all the liability waivers with the social media platforms, you should allow adult users to choose their own legal content. And I think that would simplify the situation a lot. They can still algorithmically feed something to you, because you may know that on X you have like the people you follow, and then there's the people that Elon wants you to read. That's his prerogative. Like, he should have that channel, but I do think there needs to be some channel that's just for the people that you want to follow.
Can, in fact, the censorship be reduced to mind control?
Yeah, that is what it is. It is an effort at mind control, and that sounds like super duper conspiracy theory, but it's actually the best. That's how they think about it. They're trying, so the Hunter Biden laptop, I'm obsessed with the case because it's just an amazing case study. Because there's all these people like by the way, so this is even weirder. The guy that did the Hunter Biden laptop disinformation campaign for Aspen Institute just so happens to be the guy that wrote the big UFO book for Aspen. You're like, well, that's a funny coincidence. I'm sure the UFO book is totally up and up. But anyway, like, one of the reasons I knew that him and his colleague were totally, completely full of shit, excuse my French, is that they both got up there on this, they have a little panel, they call them limited hangouts, and they were interviewing each other, and they go, yes, well, obviously there couldn't be a government cover-up of anything because the government is incompetent, ha ha, ha ha, and everyone's like, ha, yeah, the government can't do anything. And it's like, I realized, I was like, I know that they don't think that, because they were running the most sophisticated disinformation operation that we've seen, at least that I know of, during the woke reign of terror. And they're sophisticated either intermediaries or IC or something, and they're deliberately playing to this idea that Americans have, because you go to the DMV. And so most people, they experience the government as the DMV. And they go, yeah, government's totally incompetent because the DMV's incompetent. The CIA makes mistakes, it's not perfect, whatever, but the guys that are running the CIA are at another level than the people at the DMV, They are. I'm not trying to be mean about it, but, so like that's, I gotta circle back to the question. Yeah, what they want is, they want to control how you think about things, and they know that they can't perfectly censor. So the Hunter Biden laptop was, they're listening to Rudy Giuliani the whole time, they got his phone tapped, they know the laptop is real. They're running a disinformation operation to convince everybody that's Russian. And why? Because they know that the laptop is going to get out. So they were just trying to shape what you think it is. And they want to get you to think that it's Russian information, Russian disinformation. They don't want you to think about what it actually is, which is this incredible record, an amazing archive about the Biden crime family's influence peddling operation covering multiple countries and tens of millions of dollars. I mean, it's an amazing thing, but no, it's all Russian disinformation. So yes, they're trying, it's thought control. They want to, and they're also obsessed with narratives. The most sophisticated people, because narratives are like a code, it's like a story And they literally, like, they plot them out. Like, it's very sophisticated, and then they figure out how do you disrupt their other guy's narrative and establish your own. So they are absolutely considering this as mind control.
Okay. Can you explain the FISA abuses? Was it ever well-intentioned, or was it part of a greater strategy?
No, all bad. Yeah, I mean, I think we basically know now what happened. I mean, there's a bunch of things that we need to get and confirm, but the prior story before our reporting was that there was this memo created that was funded by Hillary Clinton's campaign called the Steele Memo, and then that was what they used to get the FISA warrants. But they would always say, too, they'd be like, well, that wasn't the only thing that we used. And then you were like, well, what was the other thing? And it was that prior CIA reverse targeting or bumping of using our Australian and British assets or allies to then go and bump and then get that information back to us. So no, I mean, I think it was, I mean, one of the questions I had was, what is, like, Russia, like, what is the obsession with Russia? Like, everybody knows our main competitor is China. Why are they so committed to smearing Trump with Russia? Were they worried that, you know, like I asked my sources, was this motivated by geopolitics? In other words, were these people that really wanted to hurt our relationship with Russia? Why were they doing that? And basically everybody came back and said, no, it was just a dirty trick, a dirty political trick. In fact, Hillary was concerned that she was vulnerable as seen as being soft on Putin because she had given a speech in Russia and got a lot of money for it, and she had these really bad ties to Russia. So they were worried that she was going to be accused of being soft on Russia, and so they turned, again, the law of projection, they turned it around on Trump and made it about him. I had some other thing I want to say about that. But anyway, it was just a dirty political trick that was convenient, but it was then taken from the Clinton campaign into the Obama CIA.
Do you have any thoughts on FISA in general?
I mean,
as a concept?
It should be reformed. It's obviously being abused horrifically. And there were some good, I was with a couple of members of Congress, and they were just like, they were basically like, you should just see how the CIA and the NSA and the intelligence community manipulate members of Congress. I mean, you have to remember, like, you're dealing with the best spies and mind control experts that have ever existed. Like, these are the greatest, worst people, you know, you've ever met.
That would be a great title for your next book, The Greatest Worst People. I like that.
So they're like, the intelligence community, like, they have a whole strategy for every single individual member of Congress, you know, so it's absurd how easy it is. It's too easy to get these surveillance. And I'm glad you mentioned too, because I know the freedom, you know, we're about freedom, but also this issue of secrecy it's like adjacent or foundational to it. I mean, they get control by keeping things secret, you know, and by keeping things secret, then you can dish out certain amounts of information and do mind control. So the secrecy part of this is a big part of, I think, fighting for freedom and fighting for liberty. Okay.
Just a couple more, and then I'm going to let Michael sign books and meet you folks directly. These are kind of, I'm going to combine these questions because they're a bit generational. And one is what is required to keep free speech past one or two administrations in terms of, like, structural changes? And the other is, can we reverse the toxic harm of university professors? Really, these are the people who are passing along these concepts that are so anti-American.
Yeah, so,
anti-freedom.
Yeah. I mean, these are all questions these are excellent questions. These are questions that we're dealing with now. We are doing a third book, I'm happy to say. It's called Pathocracy, Why Elites Subvert Civilization. My colleague that I mentioned, Alex, who's brilliant, we're co-authoring it. We're doing, the chapters are gender, addiction, suicide, media, universities, schools, censorship, lawfare, the nation state, the professional managerial class, decadence, and nihilism. So not very ambitious at all.
Slacker.
Yeah. So our best thinking is like on the freedom one, like, it's just this is almost a cliche, but it's like absolutely essential. The First Amendment's just a piece of paper. Like, it just has to exist in people. Like, we have to believe in it. you need public education campaigns. You have to tell your kids, you have to educate the school kids. Like we have to educate people. I did realize in this process, I remember, because I thought that my own support for free speech was sort of automatic or natural, but I then remembered that my father had told me about the Skokie ruling, which you all may remember. It's the 1978 Supreme Court ruling that upheld the 1969 Brandenburg ruling, which says that Nazis can march through neighborhoods in America, which is so radical. I mean, it's like no other country in the world allows Nazis to do that. God bless America. You know, and so my dad told me about it, and I remember as a young liberal boy, I was just like, that sounds really mean and insensitive, you know? And then my dad was like, well, you know, it's not great to have Nazis marching through your neighborhood, but we believe free speech, and he had to kind of explain it to me a couple times. So I think we have to educate people about why the First Amendment is so darn special and why it is, in some ways, the thing I'm most optimistic about in terms of saving civilization. Like, if it weren't for Elon Musk and X, I don't know if the election would have gone the way it has, but just in terms of the number of things that have come out around the mass migration, around the crime, around the addiction, around the gender mistreatment, it's all thanks to having a free speech platform, so we have to make the case for it. The universities are a total mess. It's awful. You know, the ideologies get reinforced because the professor with tenure, like literally the kids go into undergrad and they get brainwashed, and then if you go into grad school, and then if you want to get a job, you have to do what the professors already believe, so that reinforces itself. You all know this because you're here. So it's really tough. We are starting a new university in Austin. I'm the C.B.R. chair of free speech, which is great.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's fantastic.
It's very exciting. But it's 100 kids, you know. It's 100 kids, and it'll be 100 more next year, and they're amazing. But Stanford is a few more kids than that, you know, at Stanford.
Yeah. But Michael,
So,
isn't it a testament to our civics education right now? The tactics being used in China and Iran and North Korea are being given a pass here. If we had proper education in this country, they wouldn't be able to censor us the way they have.
Absolutely, and you know, the kids aren't reading. It's bad, guys. It's really bad. You got to read, you know, there's, you know, you kind of go, maybe we'll just be like an oral culture, you know, and we'll go back to the oral cultures. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a lot of hope for democracy if people don't read. And it turns out that actually the schools weren't even teaching kids to read. You may know there was this thing called whole language, where it was like, try to guess at this word, you know, and they'd be like, it's a horse. Nope, it's a pony. Turns out you actually have to sound the words out. It still turns out that everybody learns how to read the same way.
I'm finding that kind of oppressive language here.
Yeah.
Right.
It's phonics, you know. Right. So like literally like a whole kids were not taught to read, and it's really disturbing. So there's a lot of work that has to be done.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to ask you a couple more, and then we're going to get you down the stairs here. Elections, COVID, and migration, right? Those are the three places where censors really want to get busy.
Yeah.
What do they have in common?
And they're doing gender too.
Gender's very popular.
Yeah, my view is that this dark energy that wants censorship, which is both coming from civil society in an organic way and also from the state, the government, and the IC in particular, that they will look for anything to establish more censorship. That like this establishing the censorship industrial complex is the goal. Like they want like in the Europe right now, they're moving forward. Like the threat has not gone away, but they're moving forward to establish this, and they will use whatever the most popular, whatever the thing is that they can use, they will use that. So if they have, you know, anti-immigrant riots in Britain, they'll use that. You know, if they have some gender controversy, which they're probably not going to use as much anymore because that's losing popularity, but they'll use that. They'll decline. I was censored on climate change. So they're very open to censoring on anything. They just want the system in place to be able to demand censorship.
Okay. All right. Well, there are a lot of UFO questions here. I'm not sure that's your favorite topic, so I'm not going to ask you to end on. You want to do it?
Do it. Why don't you ask three of the UFO questions?
All right. Well, they want to know about the New Jersey drones. They want to know if they could be sent by intelligence from another solar system. They're curious about that might be curious about nuclear energy and not adversarial at all. These are alien visitors. And is the supernatural government governmental organization, not humans, but maybe extraterrestrials? And did they use their AI to plan COVID? Because it was pretty darn sophisticated.
It's quite a steeplechase. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, these things are, it's just, you have to be like, you just have to be like, here's what we know, and then here's some hypotheses, and we don't know, or we suspect this is true, but we haven't proven it. And I will say there's some weird stuff, like definitely the UFO, the unidentified anomalous phenomena, are very interested in our nuclear sites. I'm from northeastern Colorado, and when we had all of our drones flying around there, we were like, oh, that's where all the ICBMs are. That's funny. And then there was one that was just photographed over a Duke Energy nuclear energy plant. So whatever the phenomenon are, if it's plasma, it's very interested in our nuclear weapons and power plants. And then, of course, you probably all know that in the lore, there's a lot of like warnings about, don't hurt the environment, don't blow each other up with nuclear bombs. I don't think anybody had to tell us that from outer space. You know what I mean? Like, I think we knew, I'm sure we knew, because I know the history of environmental protection, that we didn't need anybody else to tell us to take care of the environment or that nuclear weapons are really dangerous. So I find that part of it weird. And I will just say, for people that are interested, one of the best researchers on this is this beautiful person who's still alive, Jacques Vallée. He's in his 80s. He was played by Francois Truffaut in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He's a French person. He worked with the U.S. Air Force. He's written many books on it that are very good. And he will say that he doesn't know either what they are, but he does think that there is something. But there's just a bunch of problems with the extraterrestrial hypothesis that are really hard to answer. And there's a bunch of things about the phenomenon that just don't make any sense. So I would just encourage everybody to keep an open mind and keep our eyes on the prize, which is just, we should know what our governments know. That's like the bottom line. And whatever, if it's bad news, we would like to hear that as well.
We should know what our governments know.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end this. Michael, you are one of my favorite now refugees.
Thank you.
That was the
refugee?
Right?
Yeah.
I think we need to thank Michael. Michael stepped up when the price was high. It was already known that the price was really, really high.
Thank
you. So thank you for your elegance, your intelligence, your moral compass, and your generosity to the Liberty Forum.
Thank you, Jane. I appreciate you.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.